in the reflection calculation from Tehran any kind of, I don't know, like reflection on where the relationship goes with China affecting where they are moving their steps in Afghanistan at all. I think obviously there is a little bit of a concern when it comes to China cooperation with Pakistan, especially when it comes to Afghanistan, you know, when it comes to sharing security intelligence and information about what's going on. Yes, this is in Iran's mind, obviously, and this obviously, you know, intensifies the concern that already Iran has when it comes to Pakistan's policy in Afghanistan, the relationship with the Taliban, and the potential for Pakistan to be a dominant actor in Afghanistan, especially moving forward. But it's not a Iran-China thing. And I have much more to say about Iran and China in a broader scale, but I'll leave that for another conversation.
Yes, then a lot of the questions on both on Afghanistan as well as on India. There's Asan Khan says China is widely considered in the West as a new threat challenge, often characterized as expansionist and hegemonic in its aspirations. Is there any evidence of this in Afghanistan? I think, Raffaella, you did mention this about China kind of a wait and see and not taking up that possibility. But the second part of Asan's question was, is China's biggest investment in the region, Pakistan, exhibiting any signs of being reined in by their benefactors? And Tony, I'm going to turn this to you. Because both Asan said this, and then there was a question from Ashish Singh from India, who said, I see a lot of scope for partnership between India and China in Afghanistan, considering both share similar concerns. Can this materialize? So there you've got quite a complex question about, you know, China's very big investment economically and politically in Pakistan. And also you have Pakistan's concern, which you just touched on when you started, Pakistan and India. Is there any way for this to turn out well for the region, for Afghanistan? Can shift from threat to opportunity?
Well, you know, I think it's possible. I think it's premature to say now because it will depend on, you know, the shape of the settlement. You know, I think more and more, I think the most likely outcome is some kind of Lebanization of Afghanistan, at least, you know, in the medium term. So not so much of a formal peace settlement, but something where the different regional powers agree, you know, about spheres of influence that becomes gradually formalized, and then there is time, you know, maybe even over the years to negotiate about something more structural. You know, I think the big issue is everybody found very difficult to run Afghanistan from the center, but at the same time, many don't want to have any form of decentralization. But if you had a de facto Lebanization for 5 years or 10 years, then, you know, it would be difficult to argue against some form of decentralization. And that would also, you know, as Raffaella was saying, that would anyway settle the security concerns of the regional powers. You have some skirmishing, occasional fighting, but localized, and nobody trying to export jihad from there, and that would be fine for the regional actors. So in that context, it could be that over time, and also with shifts in regional politics, the Chinese and Indians might find some convergence of interest. But it will depend on many things. It will depend on the relation between China and Pakistan, because there are tension there as well. So it's not like a brotherhood where there are no question marks. So if, for example, on the Indian side there would be an interest on more, if you like, cooperation with India, even at the economic level. Of course, India is much bigger than Pakistan, so then the Chinese could see some trades off. But I think it's too premature to say something like that, because right now we had, over the last 24 hours, 2 Afghan battalions surrendered to the Taliban. So it may be that at this pace, in 6 months, we'll be in a very different place. And there might be no Afghanistan, like no government, or maybe already a situation, a solution to the crisis might already been found by force of arms. So in this context, to discuss these details would be like talking about an economic project in Afghanistan. Who want to invest money right now? People will want, anybody will want to see how this settles. When the dust is settled over the conflict, then a lot of things can happen. But I think everybody will be very cautious for now.
Yes, and you already made clear, Antonio, in your remarks that the dust is not settling. The dust is going to be flying in all directions. Rahul, you had your hand up, and it's appropriate for you to answer anyway.
Thank you, Liz. Just on the India-China question, in 2018, when the meeting between Prime Minister Modi and President Xi took place, there was an idea from the Chinese side for both countries to cooperate in South Asia. So sort of China, India +1. We saw a bit of that attempted in Nepal, but in Afghanistan, actually, there was some nascent cooperation of training 10 Afghan diplomats each year in foreign service training academies in both Delhi and Beijing. That took place for 2 years, didn't take place last year because of COVID. But since then, things have moved on. And what has really changed are the India-China dynamics, especially after the border clash, unprecedented border clash that took place on the India-China border in June of last year. And I think that makes it very difficult at the moment for any useful cooperation, even talk of cooperation in a third country like Afghanistan for India.
Okay. A lot to think about. Let me just, and while we're thinking about pondering the way forward, we've just been joined now by Ambassador Stefano Portochevo, who is joining us. He's, of course, based in Afghanistan. Of late, he's been traveling to capitals which matter. He's also a former Italian ambassador to Pakistan. He also served as an advisor to the Italian defense minister, but he probably second to Zalmay Khalilzad. He's a man who shuttles a lot from meeting to meeting, and which sometimes takes him to different countries. Ambassador, very much welcome to your discussion. I have to say we have a lot of questions about what NATO is going to do or not to do, but please, I'll let you make some opening remarks about this absolutely crucial moment for the NATO alliance as the last of its troops leave Afghanistan.
Thank you very much, Liz. And yeah, I saw the questions on the question board. I followed the first half hour, then I had to go related to NATO's remaining here. So I'd go through my comments and then open to questions. And again, I apologize, and I'm very sorry actually for having missed this panel of very distinguished groups, among which a number of friends. I've not been able to join the start of the discussion. You may imagine things are quite busy in Kabul, as I said. However, I have had the pleasure of speaking with many of the experts on the panel previously, and I'm sure they've offered some authoritative perspectives today with a particular reference to the NATO Defense College paper, which I read. I very much enjoyed, the Regional Powers in Post-NATO Afghanistan. The value that I could add to the discussion, and I saw it also from the questions, would be to offer a NATO perspective, as you said. My first comment would be a point of contention with the topic under discussion. We should not be discussing a post-NATO Afghanistan. As Secretary General Stoltenberg has noted, we are withdrawing our troops, but we are not leaving Afghanistan. This is the start of a new chapter in our relationship. I, along with many civilian colleagues, will remain in Kabul after NATO troops withdraw. This office will have, which will remain the office of the senior civilian representative, will have three main responsibilities: represent NATO's political agenda in Afghanistan, which is tied to the shuttling back and forth, coordinate financial assistance and training to Afghan security forces, and support key enablers for the international presence in Kabul. And the key enablers, that seems, I will be transforming this office partially into a services department, because we will be running also the contracts for the airport, keeping the airport at ICAO standards, HKIA, running the secure communications, which will serve the airport and the rest of us, and the hospital in HKIA. The equation is quite simple. If without a working airport at ICAO standards, and without a workable hospital, both of which NATO will provide in liaison with effort of specific NATO allies, the diplomatic community will leave Afghanistan and the international community will leave Kabul within the next couple of weeks. And that very much defeats the process, the purpose, which is why we're running from one meeting to the other to get these things accomplished before the withdrawal of the troops. Coming to the regional dimension, some in the region may be glad to see NATO military forces leave. Many, however, will recognize the important contribution that NATO's continued support for the Afghan security forces has had on the stability of the Republic and therefore of the region. I suspect that many will also appreciate our continued support for international neighbors, particularly the airport I was talking about. It's an airport open to everybody, of course, not only to NATO members. I hope that many will also acknowledge that our priority has always been support for the peace process. I do not want to suggest that the dynamics have not changed at all. Clearly, the withdrawal of NATO troops does mark a significant shift. It may prompt many in the region to appreciate the immediacy of the threat that an unstable Afghanistan may pose in the future. There is much that regional actors could do to support the Republic in the challenging times ahead. I note that there is near unanimity among regional actors regarding their aspirations for Afghanistan. We all want to see a stable, peaceful Republic that is not a safe haven for terrorism, reason for which we all came here. Nobody wants to see the return of an emirate. It is a long-standing cliche of international engagement on Afghanistan that while we all share the same objectives, we have different views on how to get there. The starting point, therefore, must be Afghan leadership. Afghan leadership. International conferences absent Afghan ownership will have little impact on the dynamics on the ground. NATO will remain in Afghanistan so that we can hear from Afghans on how we can support the peace process under the leadership. And I would urge all in the region to adopt this approach. Please, I stop here. Thank you for waiting for me.
Thank you very much, Ambassador. And not surprisingly, you are dealing with possibly one of the most important questions right now in terms of what happens next once the last of the US-led NATO forces leave. And as you say, I suppose we did emphasize post-NATO means a new kind, as you put it yourself, a new chapter in Afghanistan. And you've brought up the issue of contractors for the airport, which brings up another regional player who didn't figure in this study group, but it's a measure of how things are changing so quickly that Turkey is now playing a role. In fact, President Erdogan said at the NATO summit that everything will come down to Turkey when it comes to the future of Afghanistan. We do know the Taliban are saying they don't want any military forces on the ground, no advisors, no training, nothing, which must be complicating your efforts. Is there anything you can share about whether there will be a way, there is a way forward in this particular knot?
Well, Lisa, I'll be as candid as I can. I mean, the Taliban have also said that they have said on one side that they don't want foreign forces. On the other side, they've also said, and they've said it to me and to everybody else, that they very much favor the permanence of the international community in a wider sense in Kabul. That is not achievable without a functioning airport. And I think the Taliban were told in so many words. I also note, lastly, that the US-Taliban agreement provides for defense of the embassies. And so we believe that it is in the spirit of the US-Taliban agreement. And on that, we will have two NATO nations, NATO member nations, which in bilateral capacity will act as lead nation for the airport. It's Turkey. If the political agreement comes through as the declarations of President Erdogan, which you were quoting, then will be formalized, and I think they will. And Norway is taking the lead as the lead nation with other nations also on the hospital. So we're getting there. On communications, we'll do it ourselves, but that is, it's more a technical issue rather than, so I'll stop there.
Okay. I'll invite our other speakers to join us with their videos, because I think we can make this a broader discussion. But if you're happy to take, I'm going to give you a question from Mursal Afshar, who said, do the support of NATO allies in maintaining their achievements, such as the stability of the Afghan state and security forces, which in return can play a key role for the security of the US, United Kingdom, and regional states, prevent the Taliban from repeating the 9/11 event, which is the biggest fear for Afghans? And even if it wasn't a 9/11 event, anything which we've been discussing here about how all the region, if they disagree on many things, but they all agree that they want to in some way deal with and contain any security threats.
Was that a question for me, Elise?
Yes, yes, for you, that you're trying to stay, still talking about protecting, to use the phrase, protecting the gains of the last 20 years, but there is still continuing security concerns. We've heard about them in this discussion. You've read about them in the study group, the rise of extremist groups, links between the Taliban and Al-Qaeda, which haven't been cut.
Absolutely. I think it is a good idea to remind the Taliban, I'm sure somebody's doing that, that if the US-Taliban agreement is valid on their side, it's valid overall. So the engagement they have taken on not allowing Afghanistan to become a safe haven and a platform for attacks against all of us is still valid. Apart from that, then there have been public declarations, so I'm not saying anything new here, but I'll repeat it anyway, that the level of our support to the ANDSF, US and NATO, which is, I remind you, to the tune of $4 billion a year, will continue at least until 2024. So the Afghans will have to do the fighting, and I think there's nobody in the world that can teach the Afghans to fight better than how they fight. There are some leadership issues. There are some issues which I think Antonio was referring to, and all of you have. There are issues of morale, there are issues of leadership, and wider issues of the political leadership, which fragmentation, which are bleeding onto the ANDSF. But by and large, we think it's, they've demonstrated their worth. They're a bit overstretched. I think that the Afghan authorities are addressing this militarily. And what I can say is that our support is continuing at the level we have now, and it's all budgeted and funded already. I hope I answered.
Yes, yes, but we've, that's been said loud and clear just by yourself now, but by yourself, by Jens Stoltenberg repeatedly about continuing support. When we began this discussion, we had a very bleak assessment from Antonio, and others may share it, but he was the one who said, and if I quote you correctly, Antonio, that within a year, we could see the collapse of the Afghan state. What, do you share that really pessimistic scenario, how likely it is, Ambassador?
Well, no, I don't actually. But this is one of the very, very few points in which I don't agree with Antonio, because Antonio is a mentor for me, as I feed on his wisdom since a couple of years, and he is very patient with me. But I don't. But there is, of course, a condition there. So what is very concerning, and which is my message, and what I'm urging my colleagues to message to the Afghan leadership, is the need for the need to avoid this fragmentation. They need to get united behind their ANDSF. There are differences. I mean, in democracies, this is what happens. But unluckily for the Afghans are the only ones who have a democracy which is confronted with the Taliban. So, I mean, our message is beat the Taliban first, and for that you need unity, and then you'll have your democratic debates like all democracies have. Diplomatic answer.
Okay, I'm going to ask you one last question, then I'm going to return to our main speakers. This person didn't give their name, but it's an important question which really goes to the heart of our discussion today, which is, to what extent does the withdrawal of NATO allies from Afghanistan, if it leads to the competition of regional powers, especially Russia, China, and Iran, can that raise a new security threat to the US, UK, and other NATO partners?
Well, no, I don't think so. I actually hope that with the fig leaf of NATO, fig leaf for some, of NATO forces on the ground removed, then people will start reasoning on the bare facts. At some points, and this is a personal, it's not NATO policy, it's my personal view here, having been around the region for a while. The NATO forces were a good reason for nothing to happen. Now that good reason has gone, and I think we made it clear that we are committed to Afghanistan, but we have also a number of other competing priorities. So we're willing to support financially, and we're willing to support in out of country actually, training with the special forces and everything else, everything that has been said by the Secretary General. But I think that it's really up to the region now to understand that a stable Afghanistan is in the political, economic, and stability interest of the whole region. And that's why we hope that that the message is understood. I do remember a number of unsuspectable non-NATO members, which when we started in the interim between the announcement and before the date was announced. So I had a number of very interesting meetings by, as I say, unsuspectable non-NATO member ambassadors here who were very, very, very concerned about the fact that we're leaving a security void. Now let's translate that into action, and that is on the regional countries to get there, because by and large they all have an influence in this country, and they all have influence and they all have interest in this country. But I think the main interest they have is to unifying behind a stable government with the Taliban part of it, as General Badr himself has said a couple of times, publicly. They want the Taliban in the government, not the Taliban as the government. I think that is a development that we all expect. But it's up to the regional country to make it happen, and we will help where we can.
Okay. We're almost running out of time, but I think as the moderator, I'm mindful that in reading this excellent joint study, it was mentioned at the very beginning that for a long time, the NATO allies didn't pay enough attention to the regional dimension. And I think this joint study is a recognition of that it's really crucial now going forward, especially as NATO starts its new chapter, that there be a real stronger engagement with the regional partners if there is to be a lasting peace in Afghanistan and the broader region. And I'm wondering whether I could just go to each of our speakers and just one sentence, since Ambassador told us, Ambassador Savano told us he's transforming his office. I'm sure that maybe if you give him a little post-it in this webinar, what should be at the top of his in tray when it comes to what you've each been talking about, either the region or regional players or individual countries, something for him to take away from this, and of course, all of those who've joined us, starting with you, Antonio.
Yeah, I'm not sure whether I got what the question is here.
But what should he bear in mind going forward? NATO wants to be better informed, more cognizant of the regional dynamics as it tries to play a different role in securing peace in Afghanistan. What should be at the top of his in tray? Just 1 point, please.
Well, I think it should. They should keep interacting with the experts, and not only us, but any experts, even the regional experts, being people from the region. And that's the only way to keep up to date and have a lot of discussions behind closed doors. There's only way to get people to speak to you frankly. Don't rely on official meetings, because nobody speaks openly and sincerely there. So try to meet people away from the public eye, and for the only way to get people to be honest.
I'm sure he'll send you a WhatsApp message in Italian right after this discussion. Rahul?
Thank you, Liz. I think, what we've seen in terms of the NATO-India relationship over the last few years is there simply hasn't been one. And I think what's most important really is to really start this engagement. I know in the last few months, there's been an outreach, reciprocated by the other side in this respect. But there is still a huge gap that has to be filled. Without this engagement, without this relationship, it will be very difficult for NATO to have a better understanding of some of the concerns and the opportunities that India could provide in Afghanistan.
Anissa?
Thanks, Liz, and thank you everyone for a very interesting discussion. I think we could go on forever, honestly. Just to summarize a few of the policy recommendations that we make at the end of the report, I think the most important ones are really, as we stressed at the beginning, that regional powers should be taking the lead, and NATO can and should play a role in facilitating this, however challenging that is. And also that really like less is often more, meaning that we shouldn't necessarily strive to have these big fora in which all actors are in the same room and agree to the same things, but sometimes multilateral diplomacy at the smaller level, similar to what is happening in other contexts, by the way, in the Middle East, for instance, are more effective and likely to produce significant results.
Raffaello?
I mean, look, I'd offer one very brief point on China, which is really one to be careful because there is, we just seen the NATO summit, and, while it was a bit overplayed in some of the media coverage, it's very clear that NATO is starting to think more about China in those adversarial terms. And here you are, NATO sitting on China's border. And, there is the potential there for that to become a focus of a potential clash. And so I think in terms of continuing to engage with Chinese counterparts to make sure that it doesn't happen, because I think that would be the worst of all worlds. If this becomes a kind of point focus of that bigger China-Western clash that we're seeing, that's going to be a loss for everybody, frankly. So I think in some ways it's a case of keeping an eye on that and making sure it doesn't really escalate in negative ways, and that you don't get caught up in that sort of bigger conflagration, which frankly, I can see the indicators are starting to go in that direction already.
I think we've lost David. Hopefully his bookshelves didn't fall on top of him. So James, did you want to say one, you've been listening very intently. Did you want to say something to Ambassador Stefano? Or you just want to listen?
No, I just think, I know NATO would love to focus on the new chapter. You've read paragraphs 18 to 22 in the communique. I think we'd love to be consolidating the gains and working to strengthen a inclusive government. But of course, we have to wait for the settlement to see where that takes us and the freedoms that it gives us. I wish all those involved all good fortune, because I think it's going to be a tricky road ahead. But I'm hopeful. Thank you.
Thank you, all of you, for your excellent insights, and of course for all the scholarship behind the discussion that we had today. And I think at this moment in Afghanistan, we think most of all of our Afghan friends and allies who, in a country which, of course, for all of the hardship and horror it's gone through, always has a sort of a healthy sense of humor and talks about, of course, and I'm sure that you've been quoted many times about being cursed by its neighbors, by its geography. And I would hope that some of the points made in this discussion, I've emphasized that there is the possibility that Afghanistan could be blessed by its neighbors rather than cursed, that the neighbors could play a positive, a productive, a pragmatic role in the region. I always remember, you probably heard President Karzai, when he was in office, used to talk about our neighbors, our brothers, and our brothers with knives in our back. So we hope that the knives will be put back into their pockets or into their sheaths, and they'll all find a way forward. Because I think if there was anything which came out of this discussion, and I think many things did, is that there is a shared interest in a stable Afghanistan and in a stable region, and that hopefully these cross-cutting interests and proxy wars will not continue to play. I'll never forget seeing Lakhdar Brahimi when, as you'll remember, in the 1990s, he resigned because of his frustration over regional meddling in Afghanistan and the inability of neighbors to get along. Let's hope that the lessons of history that everyone talks about now every day, not a day goes by without someone mentioning the lessons of history. So thank you very much for all of you. Thank you to Ruzi for hosting this discussion. Thank you to the NATO Defense College for being part of this joint study. And thank you to all of you. And thank you most of all for all of your excellent questions. And I'm sorry we didn't get to all of them. And I don't know whether there's a way in which Ruzi or NATO can somehow answer some of the questions, but your engagement with our conversation shows just how important, how much this matters to Afghanistan and to its neighbors, friends, and allies. We wish you the best going forward, Ambassador Stefano. If you transform your office, you can paint the walls pink, whatever, but let's just hope that the country will be painted with peace and not with war. Thank you very much.